My Indian name is Estecan. I'm born here in Brownie. Got a lot of relations all across the line. A lot of relations at Siksika. Big snakes and breakers, doors. Down here after COVID, they made me go by the rides at the door. Before that, it was just the door part. And I argued with them. I said, because when they put it on my airline ticket, it was rides at the do. They didn't do the O-R-E. And I said, well, that's not my name either. It's, well, we'll just soon use that than the door part. And I said, well, okay, whatever. But I was going to do a PowerPoint, but I always find when I do the value presentation, it's easier to do it hands-on rather than it is to watch a screen and me describe what's on the screen. The value part that I like to talk about is how we came about to who we are as, well, for me, I'm Skapii, Pikunnii, as well as Blackfoot and Blackfeet. The values that we talk about are based on the stories. You know, we talk about the genesis of our tribe, of that relationship that first came about when Creator made the world, which was female, the moon that was female, and then the sun that was male. And the stories that come from that relationship is almost similar to a lot of other Plains tribes in terms of how they created their genesis, how their stories came about in terms of what they believe in. I think today, because we in America were treated differently than people in Canada. You guys retained your language. We were forbid to talk our language. And my dad, he was the oldest of 20-some kids from 2 marriages from his mother and his dad. And a lot of the ones that went into Canada were allowed to speak it. He could speak it, understand it, but he told me, he said, I'm not going to teach it to you because I don't want you to get punished like the relations down here that was in the boarding schools at that time here. And I always argued with him as to why, in later years, why we weren't able to do that. And after becoming a historian, and I've been a teacher for almost 47, 48 years in the systems all over America. We do a lot of training in what we call Blackfeet 101 in terms of relating how white people view us as a vanished nation. We did a training in DC here last month, and the people in the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, some of them were amazed that Indians still existed out west. And I thought, you know, coming from the reservation here and being part of Native, you just think that other people know that you're alive and well, but not so much. When we talk about that genesis, we talk about that relationship because when the sun and the moon had the 7 boys, which later became the Big Dipper, the morals and the values of that family were established in how to take care of family, how to take care of children. And we know that during the course of that story, when the moon was entertained by the snake man, and then the sun eventually killed the snake man, there was a conflict that had been created there. And we always look at how we learn things. If we're always successful, they say you never learn. So if you look at the negative side of stories, you begin to compare the positive and the negatives. And in that relation with the 7 brothers, the story goes on to say that they were given certain special powers that created the world, geological, geophysical features of the world in terms of how that cycle of life begins. We know that the sun rises in the east. We know it sets in the west. And so the moon follows. The moon follows because in the story, she's going to get even with the sun for killing Snake Man, and she in turn is going to do away with her 7 boys. Now, other tribes say that there's 7 girls. I heard one story some time ago where there's 7 boys and one daughter, one sister. And I said, well, for me, when the old people told me the stories, I don't like to differ from that, because I think what they told me is what I should be passing on. And so that relation of those 7 boys as to how the moon was trying to get even with the sun showed the development of the world. It showed that cooperation between the boys in terms of when the sun set and the moon rose in the east, the example of water. How did she get across all the water when the boys were putting water on the world? Well, a lot of the people that we talked to, they're saying, well, contemporary mind, well, she must have had a boat, or she must have had a canoe, or she must have had a raft. Well, no. The rays of herself, the moon rays, is the one that covered the water, and she was able to walk across the water on those moon rays. And so you begin to look at the very basics in terms of people in the same sense, of how we inhabited the earth at an early stage. And more importantly, once that development takes place of all the 7 boys, and the moon never does catch the boys, we have that continued cycle. I always tell the groups that I have is, we as natives, we knew the world was round. Because how can you get one object like the sun setting in the west, and then all of a sudden it comes up in the east? I always remember as a young guy in school, they always said, the sailors from Europe, they always thought that you sail so far and then you fall off the earth. I think we all heard those kind of stories before. I said, well, native people didn't have that. The other part of that is because when you see a rider with a straight up bonnet coming from far away, all you can see is the top of the bonnet. And as he gets closer, the bonnet becomes more visible. And as it becomes more visible, the whole man or lady becomes visible, knowing that the earth is circular. That life cycle that we talk about. Life cycle to natives are very important in terms of values, because that's how we continue to exist. We always say we're still here. We talk about the 4 epidemics of smallpox. We talk about the Spanish flu. We talk about COVID. We talk about those elements that almost wiped us out, but never did. And to me, it's those values that we have always kept as to why we continue to move on, especially that cycle of life. The story of the 7 boys is important because in the old days, my grandfather rides at the door. I found about 14 of his war stories of where he, before the medicine line was established, the Canadian line in 1846, he told me the stories, well, my dad told me the stories because my dad stayed with his grandpa, that they used to go on foot from any place in middle of Alberta all the way down to the Yellowstone, even into Wyoming, on foot. And so part of the math that I teach, part of that is I have the students calculate how much or how far they would travel on foot if they were going like 20, 25 miles a day, how long it would take them to travel 600-700 miles. And so that relates the value in terms of how the people really looked at the importance of going on those raiding parties. Not so much to kill people, but to acquire that horse, because that horse was one of the very, very valuable tools that was very instrumental. And for us being Skapii Pikunniis and being Pikunnii and being Blackfoot or Blackfeet, that horse was what made us powerful. They say that horse came to us around, well, the first white guy said it was probably around 1740, 1750. And I said, well, no. I said, because the stories that I've been told, is that you can take a warrior and he can ride at full gallop, have the buckskin just so on the horse to where he can reach around the front of the horse at full gallop and shoot the enemy with his bow and arrow. And so that horse was very important because To me, that horse development in our society probably was more of 100 years before the first white man seen that. You had to learn the techniques, and you had to know the horsemanship of how to deal with that animal. And so for us, when the Thomas E. Males wrote his book a few years ago about the Plains tribe, he listed the Blackfeet in this whole area as the Lord of the Plains. There's another book that just came out. It has to do with the backbone of the world. There's quotes in there where, because we acquired the horse first and also the gun, made us one of those fiercest tribes. Plus, we were dominant in terms of population. Of the 3 bands at that time, they calculated 40,000 Pikunnii. And then I think there was like 20-some thousand Kainai, and then there was about that many Siksika. And so what made us dominant was that force. I read a battle where there was a tribe, a band that was down here. I'm thinking between Lethbridge and probably Havre, Montana. They got ambushed by a war party of Crees. And there was probably 200 Crees in the party. And they wiped out all the men, and some of the women escaped. They went back north, and within a few days they amassed almost 1,000 plus warriors. And they followed them back to where they come from, and they annihilated the whole Cree band that attacked the small Blackfeet band. And so, to me, when you can amass that many people in such a small time period, there must have been a large population of Indian area. We're having a big dispute right now over land. We have that declaration between the Confederacy of North Saskatchewan to the Yellowstone. And the Crows right now are claiming that they claim all the way up to the Sweetgrass Hills. We call it Sweet Pine Hills. And then the Kootenays are claiming that this whole area along the eastern side was their traditional territory. And I said, well, when you look at the value of land, when you look at what the Creator gave us in terms of this is yours to take care of, you take care of it, it'll take care of you. And so before those boundaries and before they actually described those physical boundaries, we had that outer realm of the territory beyond that. I've had stories of Blackfeet speaking people up in the Yukon area, in south the Yukon territories. I have a story that was told to me from some Hawaiians that I served with on the National Education Committee of how Blackfeet had saved. They had 5 ships that came up the coast from the southern route through California up to Washington, and 2 of the boats shipwrecked. And there was 10 Blackfeet men that they had taken back with them after they had repaired their boats. They didn't mention how many Blackfeet were actually on the coast, but they took 10 Blackfeet men back. And I was after that, I see Hawaiians and I tell them, you know, you guys are part Blackfeet. You guys look like people back home. Them 10 Blackfeet men, them days they had many wives. I read a story where one guy had 15 wives. Can you imagine having 15 wives? Yeah, there you go. So the value that we talk about there is very important, because when you look at how we existed in terms of people and how those values were so important, when we looked at that part of that development, we also have pottery that came from the New Mexico area. And I always argue the point, because even our museum up here says that we come from the east. We come from the Great Lakes. Because they categorized our language as Algonquin, therefore the Algonquins come from the Great Lakes. I said, well, in all of our stories, when we talk value, we talk food, because food is of value. We don't have any rice stories, except when they give us commodities. We don't have any stories of canoes. We had the bull boats that we crossed the rivers here made out of rawhide. And a lot of the things, the characteristics in the Great Lakes, we don't have. And I say that's the reason that I don't believe we came from the Great Lakes. I don't believe that when the Mayflower hit the Plymouth Rock in 1492, that all of a sudden all of us Indians shifted to the west. I don't believe that. But that's part of the scientific part of me. Part of my college education is being close to a science teacher, history teacher. I taught in a high school here for years, and I got to teach at the De La Salle Catholic School a couple of years in science, and I always brought up the fact of Darwinism, of Blackfoot, of the scientific, the Catholic part of it, and I could never get the Catholic people to come in there and tell their whole story in terms of their creation story. And I said, the old people told us that when Creator created people, they were no difference or no better than anybody else. They were equal to the animals, the plants. We could talk to them. But people, we abused that power, so it was taken away from us. And so when I was teaching science at De La Salle, I told the people, I said, when Creator made us, they made 5 colors of people. I have never seen a white monkey. I've never seen a yellow monkey. I've never seen a red monkey. Because the scientists say that we all crawled out of a cave in Africa and we're descendants of monkey over so many years. I have to believe our creation stories in terms of those 5 colors of people were given the land bases that they have with the same instructions. The value of prayer, the value of taking care of each other, the value of family. And there's a lot of other ones I'll go through here in terms of how the English call those values. And so for me, when I do the presentations, I like to get to the opposite side of the science part of it, because to me, the other side of it, the native side of it, is more familiar and it's more exciting than just saying, well, piece of paper, it's made out of this, made out of that. I was a school board member here for 18 years, and I was telling the school, you guys got to get back to teaching the hands-on things. Quit giving them books, giving them tests. Do this, and tell them how the important part of it, and mix it all up. Just don't, I got to go to a math class and learn algebra. Geez, that's boring. Throw the algebra into the native teachings of that. And so when we look at those values like that, and we can see how those are important as to comparison, we find that there's a lot more than just that noun part of it. Our language is very verbal. And when they prohibit us from speaking that, it took that identity, that identification of that element away from us, and we began to assume nouns on everything. And again, that was part of a value that, to me, that they really, really hindered us in terms of continuing on as 100%. The story of the Big Dipper also ties in with the North Star. It also ties in with the Little Dipper. The old people tell us that Blackfeet are the only people in the world that have a belly button in the sky. That's what they call the North Star, is the belly button of the world, because that's where the lady come down from the sky with her son. I always compare that value in terms of how many of you have seen Percy Jackson movies. They're really interesting because Percy Jackson is the product of a human mother and Poseidon, the god of water. And the boy doesn't realize that he has powers until he's beat up by that young girl. And he goes to the creek and he lays down in the creek, and the wounds that he has on his hands, by his hands in the water, they begin to heal. And he begins to realize that he's got some special power. So when that young man came down with his mother and come to her village, there was things that happened there that made the son go back up into the sky. Mainly he was told, the mother was told not to let the young man touch the ground, the bare ground, and his grandmother allowed him. So he went back up into the sky. And so that whole story then leads on to the establishment of the medicine lodge, or the Okon ceremony, and all of the teachings that go along with it. There's only a few stories that I have run across where the wolf, I got him on the end there, is an important part of that, because the wolf trail is what we call the Milky Way in white man's world. And that was the trail that the lady and her son had come down to earth and the spider is the one that spun the web like a ladder so she could climb down to her village. So when you start combining all of those values in terms of how many people are scared of spiders, quite a few. And the first thing they want to do is smash them. What the old ladies and the old men told us is when you see a spider, take and put a piece of paper, slide it under a cup, put that spider in there, take it out, say a little prayer to that spider, and tell him to take the bat away. Throw him to the wind. And same with the owl. I'll talk about the birds relation here in a minute. The owl has always been a very important part of us because growing up, I always heard the owl was so bad. And every time I seen an owl, I thought, why did they call it so bad? But after getting into the cultural component of who we are many, many years ago, I realized that the Skapii has two reasons, two purposes, good and bad. Just like everything else in the world, good and bad, night and day, men and women, whatever, whatever. But we, as Indian people, have a way to block the bad. If it comes, that means getting your face painted, getting your vow or whatever you're going to do. The other part of that is if it's good and you get your face painted anyway, the good is going to happen. But if it's a bad omen that they're talking about, that painting or that vow will block that kind of negativity. And so the value of that bird to me is very important. A lot of young people say, oh, I was told that if I see an owl, I should shoot it. Well, some people say yes, some people, I say no. Just leave it alone. I've heard too that I had an elder up in Siksika tell me that if it talks to you, then that is really bad. Then you should start looking at something really serious in terms of maybe putting up a medicine lodge or an okon during the summertime. But the values that are all in those teachings are always coming out of it. The 7 boys again, the family structure. The negative part of that is the splitting of the family. We have so many young people today that are getting divorced that I think if they go back and they look at the value of family, of value of life itself, and we don't teach that. We don't teach that in the school as that transition from being a youngster into that young adulthood. We've been seriously over the last couple of years trying to get our people into the school to where we take young girls when their bodies begin to change, is to go into that instruction in terms of that respect that you have. Why there's a monthly. But at the same time, the men should realize the products and what they need to do to complement each other. Not to be curious about it like we have, but to complement each other in terms of the value of growing on into a young person. We know the value of marriage because a lot of times our Darnell's grandmothers, great-grandmothers, my grandmothers, great-grandmothers, they usually got married about 15 years old. Or they were part of a family that they become a wife of somebody. So that age between, I'm going to say 12 and 15 is very, very important to Indian people, both male and female. But because we've got away from that, we've got into the white society, and we look at TV and we look at all of these things that affect us, we want to be like that. I remember my son wanted to be like Michael Jordan. He wore his braids till he was a freshman in high school. Then all of a sudden he made the team. He was one of the only sophomores that had made the A squad here in Browning. You have 150 kids try out for 3 teams here in Browning. He was a sophomore, he made the team. What did he do? Cut his hair off. Not short, but short like Michael Jackson. Had to have Michael Jackson shoes. Had to have the other Jack, what's his name? Jordan. Michael Jordan, excuse me. I'm always getting, what's his name? Michael Jackson and Jesse Jackson mixed up too. But it had to be that way because that's what was accepted. There was one kid on a team, he had to have those inflatable tennis shoes, $160. That was in 1981. The rest of the kids, oh, geez, he's got $170 pair of tennis shoes, and I got $39.95 Walmart. Does it make you any better basketball player? No. The kid sat on a bench most of the time because he wasn't a starter. But the kids with the $39.95 tennis shoes were playing the most. So the value that we look at in terms of transition from what we used to be to today is very difficult for our young people. One of the things that I always look at was, you look at the birds, you look at the eagle, and you look at the history of the eagle in our culture. Very, very important, because the feathers from the golden eagle was more important than the bald eagle. But America, in the early development of America, in the government itself, it said that we're going to adopt the bald eagle. If you look at them early pictures of congressional hearings, they came in white wigs and black robes, the same that a bald eagle looks like. It's got a white head, a black body, and then the only part of the bald eagle that's white is the head and the tail feathers. But if you look at the golden eagle, you see that on the bonnet there, how colorful they are compared to just a black feather. These are the wingtips that we get off the golden. And you can see that the color variation makes them a lot more attractive than that plain old black feather. When you look at traditional culture, all of the elements of the world respected each other because they had to depend on each other for existence. The bald eagle itself, the stories that I've seen is where the female picks the husband. The female picks the male partner. But the males have to compete with each other to be able to get that female's attention. But once the female picks her partner, she'll pick that male eagle for life. Now, to me, the value of that is very important, because that's the same thing that we do in contemporary life, is two people getting together, not necessarily two guys fighting over one girl or vice versa, but the element of togetherness, of having a mate for life. You know, I always bragged. Darnell says, don't be bragging so much. I said, well, we're going on 55 years of marriage. Somebody said, well, how old were you when you got married? I said, 10. No. We actually got together in high school, and we had a daughter when I was a senior, and that daughter just passed away last year due to contemporary type things that we couldn't control over in Washington. But to me, following that kind of value and telling young people as to how that should come about, I think what really solidifies us is we were away from our families. We left Browning for 7 years. In the times of turmoil, we couldn't run across the street to Mama's house. Couldn't run across the street to my dad's house. So we had to be compatible, just like the eagle itself. I've seen the female being the primary hunter, but also that shared ability by the male also. But then you take the story of the eagle itself and how they raise their young. If the eagle has two chicks, the older chick will kill the younger chick because of dominance. That means that the weaker one isn't able to be a weak elder or a weak adult, so the older one kills it. We talk about twins many years ago. I know there was a great-grandmother in our family that said that twins were really not allowed in any of the bands because that was the splitting of a personality, that you actually took an individual and you split the personality. You split the powers of that individual. And so that other baby was either given to another band or it was left out in the woods. Stories of grandmothers who were left in the forest, found by some other ladies, and actually raised by another family. And there was no talk in terms of where that baby come from or what name it went under, whatever, because that wasn't allowable. The other thing too that came about in recent years is what they call the, I guess, the gay society. In all of our stories that our old people told us, we never had gays in our bands because there was responsibilities. There was what we call man-hearted women. For us down here, Pikunnii, Running Eel was a manly-hearted woman who was given all the responsibilities of a man because she was raising her younger brothers and sisters. But she was going to marry a man before she got killed by the Pikunnii and going over the pass. And so when that type of situation comes up, Darnell and I, we had a Thunder Medicine bundle for 24 years. And we did numerous Okons. We belong in the Beaver in all these different societies. Individual came to us and he said, I have a gay daughter, but she's the male of the partnership. Can she sit with me on the other side? We said no. Because she has opted to take that male role in that female-female partnership. You're putting a man and a man together where it's a man and a woman always. And he was a little upset about it, and so he went to other people, and the other people told him pretty much the same thing. So to have his ceremony, he had to have an actual lady on that other side of him before he did his bundle. And what was surprising is that everybody agreed to that because the value of that had been passed down. And so the respect of that is very much part of that. The other birds that we talk about is the raven. You know, to me, when I seen Alfred Hitchcock, the Birds movie, I don't know how many of you seen that movie. They really, really penalized the birds, but them birds were flown in from Europe. They were called starlets, right? And once they flew in and they did the filming, they let them go wild. And you see those starlets all over now. They're very aggressive bird. They're worse than a blackbird or even a crow. But that raven is very important because that raven comes out, the first bird in our Thunder Medicine. After the bundle's unwrapped, that bird comes out and you sing to it. Sometimes you'll hear the story of that raven. And so for me, when you hear that raven song, you got to question why and where and how did we get that song? The value of that song that's attached to that bird. And when I asked the old people about it, they said many, many years ago when people and the animals and the birds and all the other things could talk to each other, the ceremony was being presented. And all of these different characters and elements of the world are invited into that ceremony. And as they come into the ceremony, they change from their natural form into their human form. And while they're sitting there, they're saying, if you make me part of your ceremony, here's my song. So Raven, when he came in, he changed into his human form and he gave the people of that ceremony that Raven song. And when he left, he turned back into that raven and went. Now the story is that the raven used to be white until he got caught up in the smoke of the lodge and he turned black. Again, a long story that we really don't have a lot of time to get in. And some of you are probably familiar with them stories. And so all part of that is respectful in terms of what was given to us. You know, in today's world, I always say that we become an I community. Because when we look at our ceremonies, we went to one here last week, there was probably maybe 150 people there, which was a good turnout. Enrolled members living on a reservation is probably 9,000 people, and only 150 people showed up to the ceremony. I went to other ceremonies in the last few months where there's only like 15 people there. And I'm thinking, we've lost that value of why those ceremonies are so important, of the teachings that's coming down through all of those. The other bird is the loon. the loon comes out in beaver ceremony. And how you dance with them, you imitate their natural actions. Diving in water, swimming, making noise, diving. And while you're dancing, you're representing that bird in that sacred ceremony. Again, that relation to nature in terms of what we've always had. When I say that we've become an I community, it's how much can I gather versus my neighbor. I've seen so many people say, oh, that guy's got a new car again. How the heck does he do that? I can't do that. And then they won't talk to each other because he's got a new car. I owned a restaurant down here, town here, called Burger Treat for 10 years. I had to close it because I couldn't expand. The local bank wouldn't let me expand into a Burger King. And rather than continue to limp along, I could seat about 42 people comfortably, but I would get people lined up. It was kind of like a McDonald's where you order at the window and wait for your food. I had people down the roadway waiting to make orders. And I wanted to expand it to about 100 and some, and they wouldn't do it. So I closed it. But I remember one time, I went and I got me not a new pickup, but a different pickup. And pretty soon my sales dropped off. And I was telling my wife, why do you think our sales dropped off? It's nice weather. We got the best burgers in town. We got the best everything in town on our menu. We had soft ice cream and all the goodies. But our sales kind of dropped. And then after a couple months, they start coming back up. And so some of the people that didn't come in during the months, I asked them, why didn't you guys come in? Oh, they say, you make too much money on us local people. That's why you got a new pickup. We're not going to let you have a new pickup. We'll go down to Cut Bank and shop at a white guy's place. Because there's not that competition with the white guy down there. And I thought, oh my God, we've lost that value of we. You know, we were down in Oklahoma last fall. We visited the brand new museum there at the Oklahoma Museum, $175 million museum. You know how they paid for it? 39 tribes committed the funds to build it. And they all share in the presentations, the information, the data, the whole works. 39 tribes working together for a common goal. Up here, we have an arbor going up, which is a real big contention. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost. It was supposed to start out at $1.5 million, then it went to $2 million and $3 million. Then one guy told me, oh, geez, that's $15 million building. And I said, I have an architectural degree. I don't think it's $15 million that's built up there. But nobody knows. And I'm telling the powers to be, have these meetings so that people know what's going on in the community. Go back to that we. When we talk about the value of our ceremonies, I talk about that man and woman. In our ceremonies, there's always that man and woman. Always. But there's also another part of that is the food. Without that food, you cannot have your ceremony, especially the thunder pipe, because that Sabbath berry is one of the most important parts of your food, because that berry is prayed with. The people that bring in food make that vow. And without that smudge that you start with to bless that food as it comes over, you're violating the very basics in terms of people's responsibility of providing food to help everybody else. That commonness. Everybody gets equal plates. Of course, when you're up front like I am, I get an extra plate once in a while. 2 red wieners instead of just 1. But see, you can see the value that we begin to lose. And it was all part of that educational system that we talked about. We talk about respect, the humor. Humor is a value that Indian people have. You know, I did the dedication to the new historical society in Helena here about a year and a half ago. It's an $81 million facility, and Darnell and I get to do the Blackfeet part of it. And the millionaire that's in Montana, he was there. He was part of it because he donated $25 million to the project. I was walking, his wife, him, the mayor was sitting there. And the gal that's head of the society came up. She said, I want you to introduce to Mr. Washington, Dennis Washington. He also built the big addition up there at the Grizzly Stadium and University of Montana. So I'm getting close to him. He stands up and he says, you're Smokey, he rides out the door. And I said, yeah. He said, before you tell me any stories, I'm going to tell you my story. And he was telling me about how Earl Operson had given him and his wife Indian names at a barbecue some time in the past. And I thought, you know, that's really amazing, because our humor in terms of our stories. He had heard about me telling stories. You know, everybody says, well, get Smokey, he can really tell good stories and everything. And I said, well, you know, I've listened to a lot, and I can repeat a lot of it. And then the mayor, he's a little short guy from Kenya, little black guy. And he's there, and he's got his bright native clothes on and everything else. And he stands up, and he's only about this big. Dennis Washington's about 6'1". And he's standing, Smokey, can I go with you guys? Can I go with you guys? And I was thinking about the cartoon where you have the big dog and the little dog. And I thought, you know, that's pretty unique, because I can remember 20 years ago where you go to the Capitol in Helena, they wouldn't even let you in the door if you were native. We do the blessings up here at the big lodge at East Glacier. I remember as a high school student in 1968 going in there, and they chased me out of there. If you're not a guest, you leave. But that has all changed. We do the blessings of the park every year. We do the training for the rangers. And we implement a lot of these values in terms of how you as a stranger coming into Glacier National Park better view Blackfeet National Park of what it was before they changed the name. So the humor part of those stories is, to me, what brings people together. That smile. That smile tells me that people are healthy, they understand, they like the humor that's part of it. And they say health-wise, if you smile more than frown, you're a better person mentally. So if you're better mentally, you're better physically, and you're better spiritually. And so the four realms of being people are all enhanced. Family, we talked about the seven brothers. We talk about other families in terms of the animals once they begin to raise their young. The buffalo, very, very important animal in our life, not only for the food, but to how it approaches problems. I was part of the council when we brought in the first 67 head back in '83, and from then we have about, I think 400 or 500 now. But that buffalo is known to face the storm. And as that storm approaches you, he goes through the storm. And the element there is, once you get to the other side, what do you see? Sunshine. People, if they would take the lesson of the buffalo and face their problems head on, instead of avoiding it and avoiding it and avoiding it. Because when you avoid the problem, there's other problems that are created. And it becomes more demanding on the individual if you continue to try to run away from the problem. And so even the buffalo in its own sense tells us that there's values of how we take care of ourselves as people and how we shared those things. There was a time when they called a water buffalo 8 people. I seen a lodge that a guy designed here just a while ago where he's going to make a water buffalo lodge. And it's kind of, it's not like the buffalo you see. It's a little bit more grotesque in terms of the teeth, the shape, more of a serpent type buffalo. And then after the reversal, when Napi came in and said, hey, wait now, you buffalo can't be eating those people. The people got to eat the buffalo. So there had to be that arrange of responsibility between the buffalo and the people, and the buffalo became our mainstay. 1883 was the last buffalo hunt on our reservation. The buffalo was shot down here by Shelby before you cross the line into Sunburst, Lethbridge area. 1883-84, we had our starvation winter. Over 700-800 Blackfeet starved to death out south here, because the deal is that the government, because we signed all those acres of land over to them for settlement for pilgrims, would take care of us. It didn't happen. We found later where the agent had actually sold a lot of those commodities into Canada, and his account in Kansas City reflected those payments. But we didn't know any of that because the government records were sealed. We couldn't get into them until the Information Freedom Act was passed. So we had able to get into it and see how that type of value affected us. And where that all come about? Civil War. How many of you seen Dances with Wolves? After the war, they didn't have nothing to do. Oh, what are we going to do if we won the war? Well, let's go fight them damn Indians and start moving them west. That was even prior to Oklahoma. I only had 4 indigenous tribes in Oklahoma prior to the Trail of Tears. Now there's 39 tribes in Oklahoma. The Carlisle School, built from a Northern General, General Pratt. Kill the Indian, save the man. Very, very detrimental in terms of, you guys all know the boarding school story. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And for me, being part of that in traditional, where my dad didn't want me to go through those types of things, hinders me in terms of me speaking my Blackfeet. I speak it during the ceremonies because that's some of the protocol in the ceremonies, but to go out and talk general conversation, I can't do that. I can understand words. Getting better at it though, but I'd like to have been fluent when I was about 10 years old. So when we look at that, the other part of that is there was another general that said, hey, why are you guys fooling with these Indians? You're trying to put them here, you're trying to put them there. We want all of their land. You know what you have to do? Kill all 50 million of them buffalo. Kill their food source. Then they have to come to us. And oh, by the way, yeah, we'll give you rations, but give us that 20 million acres over there that we need for settlement. The history of the buffalo. 50 to 75 million buffalo during Lewis and Clark days, 1804, 1806. By 1883, there was only about 2,000 buffalo left. Those tribes that were dependent on buffalo meat and its supplies now depended on the government, which didn't provide. The aspect of the buffalo itself, the buffalo jump, the value of that went away when we acquired the horse, because now we could chase the buffalo on horseback. The gun, the value of the gun become more important than the value of the bow and arrow, because now if I had to shoot my enemy, I could shoot him at 150 yards versus him trying to hit me with an arrow at 40 yards. I always have a demonstration with the kids over on the west side. I'll give him the bow and arrow, and I got a little bitty, you seen these little guns that's a lighter? I'll take my gun out and, all right, put your shield up. I'm going to shoot you. He's got his shield up. And I'm saying if I had a real gun, that shield would be ineffective because a bullet would go right through it. So the values that we see coming through, not only from the Genesis side of it to contemporary side of it, changes, but it doesn't change the aspect of we as natives as to how we utilize that in the respect of it. Everything that we have, you see over there, it's got a song. There was a guy told me, well, he said, we owned the Sweetgrass Hills. And I told him, sing me the song. What song? I said, because in our culture, everything has a song. That's how we respect. That's how we give back and forth. Well, I don't have a song. I said, that's why you don't own it. You don't own anything. You only are able to utilize it because that's what the Creator gave you. Until later years, you have to have a title for your car, for your house, for your land, this, and that. If you don't have that, somebody else can claim it. Again, a contemporary attitude. The situation that we have, not only what was caused by the government, is that ability to stay in tune to who we are. When I talk about songs, there was a guy told me from Pikunnii over here, he said, yeah, we owned all of that land east of the Rockies. And I said, no, you never. He said, how do you know? I says, when we massacred a couple of your parties coming through the pass, where did you bury them? Well, we brought them back to the other side. I says, yes. You brought them home. You're saying home is across the mountains. If the Blackfeet got killed here, they buried them here. That's our home. That's where we bury people. And the guy said, well, I got to go. I got some else. Yes, exactly. You're claiming things that you don't have. The people, I talked about ourselves a little bit. We need to begin to look at being able to work together again. The government, when they created the reservation system, they created exactly what I talked about, North and South, the Civil War. During the times of that early establishment, they said, you bring in all of your guns, your knives, your bow and arrows, everything else that could be harmful, you bring it in. In exchange, we'll give you the blankets, the rations, the whole thing. You know who came in first? The north side. Because the south side was pretty adamant about keeping their culture intact. But they also knew that if they kept their weapons, they were able to hunt. And so after all the good things were given away, they said, all right, the rest of you from the south can come in and gather whatever's left. What happened? Civil War mentality. North versus the South. I always, I don't say families, but there was a time when the North wouldn't marry the South and the South wouldn't marry the North. But in later years, because of the schools and some of the off-reservation schools, they began to marry each other. But there's still those stories to where those old families still had that competition. You get all the Pendletons, and then you get all of the little leftover pieces that are there. Or you get all of the backstraps, and then you get the ribs. That type of mentality. Army, separate and divide. And we still have that in our communities. When we talk about different groups, Darnell and I, we were appointed the ambassadors of the tribe, and we went into programs. In my experience with programs of accountability, fiscal management, all of that kind of stuff, I began to go in there and I was telling these 15 health programs on the reservation. Let's all get together. Let's see where our responsibilities are, and then those that are overlapping, let's see which ones aren't doing what happened. 8 of them came in. The other 7 or 8 wouldn't come in. You know what the comment was? You're trying to take my job. If I wanted your job, I'd have had it when you were in kindergarten. I said, I probably wrote the grant some 30 years ago, I don't know. I said, but why would I want your job? An excuse to where my program. And we found that in over a 6-month period of trying to get those programs together, we had 5 suicides. And we asked the hospital. One of them was a direct relation of mine. Went in there, admitted to the doctors that, hey, I'm drunk, I'm going to go commit suicide. The people in the emergency room said, we don't have a hold policy, so you just go ahead and go home. Told the family, and I just watch him. Within an hour, he blew his head off out here at Little Badger. And we go to the hospital and we're saying, why don't you have a policy of 24-hour, 48-hour hold on these people that admit they're going to commit suicide? Well, that's not what Indian Health Service is about. And I said, well, change. Go back to the value. He's admitting he needs help. But in our contemporary world, it's an I attitude. Well, it's my program, it's my budget, it's my people, and I'm not going to share it because it's not in my job description. I said, oh my God, them old people, if they'd seen your job description, they would run you out of camp. Well, it's not my job description to go raid horses from the crows. It's all you women, you guys go raid them. Oh no, it was an understood responsibility. Spirituality. Spirituality is one of the big things. I don't really like to refer to it as spirituality or religion because that's an English term. I like to refer to it as a way of life. When I get up in the morning, I smudge. In the evening, Darnell smudges. We practice that every day. During my restaurant days, I used to have the priests and the nuns come down, and I'd feed them on Friday, fish dinners, because they like fish on Fridays. one of those values that they had versus me eating a hamburger on Friday. Anyway, we'd talk philosophies, and I would tell a priest, why don't you allow women in the Catholic Church to be priests? Well, that's not the way it was structured. And I said, you compare our values. You get a lot more people together if you share those values. And I asked the nuns, well, how come you guys don't push to get at the top? Well, we know our position. And I'm saying, really? You guys have that understood and you accept that? Wow. I used to be an altar boy. And I had to learn Latin. And I was terrible at Latin. So after a few times of getting slapped alongside the head by the priest for not saying the right word, ringing the bell at a certain time, I says, why am I here? Why am I in a situation where if I say something wrong, I get slapped? If I quit. So later, after we moved back home, I went into the church and they were doing everything in English. And I thought, my God, I got beat up because I couldn't speak Latin. Now they're doing English. But the priests are coming to me asking, how come my congregation is dwindling? Do I put more sweet pine or sweet grass for my incense during church? They had drummers up there singing Indian music while they should have been singing Catholic songs. And I'm telling you, you just diluted your whole system. If you want to be Catholic, go 100% Catholic. If you come to my ceremony, you're not going to sit beside me with my pipe beside me here. You're going to sit down with the common people because you don't have the transfers coming in. But if you have the transfers, you have that respect and that responsibility to know what that transfer is about. And you know your position. You know your responsibilities. If you look at kids in school, and I always use my kids, the unruly kids are the ones that are coming from the contemporary families, where maybe there's just a mother or just a dad raising them. Or even, we have 178 grandparents in Browning that are raising grandkids because of the parents are non-functional. And I'm thinking, that is really crazy because in our ceremonies, the traditional kids will sit for 6 hours without saying anything. And there's a few that you have to correct, and that's normal. And they're usually related to the pipe owners because that spoiled brat, what they call that, spoiled brat? Yeah, yeah. The spoil. Yeah. And that's the one that'll jump up, but the pipe man will say, you sit down. I don't care who you are, you sit down. And they'll go and they'll sit. So in the classroom, you see that same thing happening. But it's those unruly kids that are not in part of ceremony that are making all the ruckus about what's going on. Spirituality to me is when you're given the responsibility. When we were transferred in our Okon ceremonies, the rules that were given to us were very, very explicit in terms of almost like 10 commandments. How many of you seen History of the World Part 1, where Moses comes out of the mountain and he's got 15 commandments and he drops one and he says, oh shit, I only got 10 commandments. But in our Okon ceremonies, those commandments are family, togetherness, don't be rude, don't be loud. Sometimes we're in ceremonies over here and we come in there a little bit late and these old people will get up and they'll leave. And they'll come over and they'll sit Darnell and I down. One of the students later, he said, Smokey, you're really rude. I said, well, how's that? He said, you came in, you made them old people leave their chairs so you and Darnell can sit down. I said, no. I said, if you knew the respect and responsibility of them old people that don't belong to that society or that ceremony, they knew the respect to get up and offer us their seats. I said, but see, you're not part of those ceremonies. You still believe in the contemporary way. If you're into those ceremonies, you will realize that there are certain places that people sit. Oh, gee, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Good time to learn. We talk about responsibility. They say when that first thunder comes is when you begin to prepare for your thunder pipes. When the ice begins to melt, your beaver people go. And then when the berries are ripe, you do your Okon ceremonies. There was a time when elder gentleman here, name was Tom Minigun. This was Les Monroe's grandpa. And Les stayed with him, so I got to stay with him once in a while. We'd sit there and we'd talk to that old man, and they'd translate Indian into English. And he was a weatherman. He'd tell you what the weather was going to be when the geese flew high or low, where the beaver or the muskrat huts were in the lakes, and all of these different types of nature signals. And I told him one time, I said, Tom, how come you can be so accurate on this? He kind of smiled and told his grandson, tell him, CJOC, Lethbridge, Alberta, weather station. Because the weather come down the mountain front. And I thought, oh, that just blew my mind. I thought, and he did have some realistic calculations. So in climate change, today's world, you see that difference. Last year, we went from the border at Bab to the southern border at Birch Creek. No Savis berries. Because the hail and whatever got to all of them. And we said, what are we going to do about ceremonies? Well, Darnell and I, we pick about 50 to 60 gallons a year. And so we had a few extra leftovers. And people were coming to us, oh, you got berries, you got berries. And you hate to, well, you tell a little white lie. No, I don't have any berries. Part of going against that honesty, that's been given to you through transfer. Otherwise, you give all your berries away, and then you don't have berries for yourself. So we were up this last week. We looked all over the park, and there's berries all over the place. And I told her, this year we're picking 100 gallons. Don't care how long it takes. I was in high school a couple of years ago. I did a presentation to the seniors. And I told them, I said, how many of you look at the importance of picking berries in your lifetime? There was probably maybe 80, 90 seniors. Only 2 raised their hand. And I said, tell me why picking berries are important to you. Well, they said, at your ceremonies and other ceremonies, you have to have berries to be able to conduct the whole ceremony. Take a berry, you pray for it, and you put it in the ground, bury it in resemblance. It's supposed to regrow the tree again. Again, a value of taking something mystical and creating into what you really are about. And I said, the rest of you seniors, why don't you know that? And so in my family, when my grandsons and granddaughters are with us, and the berries are ripe, I'm telling them, let's go pick berries. And the younger ones will say, oh, goody, we can sit in the car and eat berries while you guys are picking. And no, you guys are going to get out there and you're going to pick too. And so they know the importance of just picking berries, that little small thing. Well, what we did last year is we sent some people up into, I think it was Okotoks, the berry farm up there, and we got gallons of berries, and so we satisfied it that way. And again, against protocol that we should have saved from that year before for last year's drought. But again, climate change. Birds, I was looking at the news the other day where birds are having their youngs, but the worms or the caterpillars or the grasshoppers aren't around to provide the food. So a lot of those young chicks are dying because of lack of food, because of the climate change. And when you talk to scientists about that, they don't care. I shouldn't say they don't care. It's the ones that are in the capitalistic attitude of, hey, if I change, I might lose some money. Again, going back to that high attitude that we as Indian people sometimes dawn on ourselves because we're always competitive. Well, I got to get a higher paying job than you. I see that so much in our tribal systems. We talk about love. I was trying to think at one time because in over the years, Darnell and I, we were trying to see how that cycle came about on the reservation to make people so dependent on the government, how the divorces were happening, how suicides were happening. You look at our street people. At one time, there was probably maybe 5 or 6 people, street people. The other day, I counted 21. And you know who's dominant out there? Men. Because the men's role in our system is dysfunctional. I think there was 80 some percent of our workforce on a reservation is female. And most of those are head of family raising the kids. But when we talk about love, I go back to my family and I'm trying to think, when did I ever hear love in my household? I was the youngest of 4, 2 older sisters and then a brother just 2 years older than me. And I can't remember. Because love was a word that I guess in terms of taking advantage of somebody. Oh, I love you, let's go to the bedroom. You know, that kind of mentality. But over the years, we began to implement the word love into our family. We talked to our children. And at first they said, why are you making us say that? I said, because the connotation that we want you to get out of the word love is respect. Not the sexual part of that. And now we're hearing different ones saying, oh, gee, yeah, we'll see you on Tuesday. Love you. Hang up the phone. But my sister, she passed away last year. She was, 74. She was a few years older than I was. And I would tell her, love you, sis. And it'd just go quiet and pretty soon click. So I'd go out there and I'd have coffee with her in the morning sometime. I told her, I said, her name was Donna. Donna, I said, why don't you tell me that you love me? She said, it's really awkward to tell somebody that you love them because of that falseness that the word had given us over the past 100 years or whatever it was.
Residential school too?
Mm-hmm.
Residential school, because you're forbidden to talk about sexuality.
Yeah.
And you're deemed already a sexual predator at 6 years old.
You know, there's those movies coming out that, oh, Darnell, don't watch that, you're going to get mad. And I told him, well, I said, I'm glad I don't live next to Cut Bank. Else I'd be going in there beating some white guy because of what happened during those times. I think it's that movie 1883 that come out sequence to Yellowstone where the young girl is being punished by the priest and the nuns, and she ends up killing the nun. And I thought, you know, in our world, Baker Massacre, 1870, that whole element of Baker Massacre occurred because Malcolm Clark raped his sister-in-law. And the brother said, you know what the consequence of that in our band, in our nation? Death. You don't abuse somebody else. And so the brothers and a few other people went down here by Helena and they killed him. Well, his wife was I think she was Kainai, huh? I think she was from the other side. Anyway, her other family came down to comfort her, but Malcolm Clark, the white guy's best buddy, run into Helena. And he said, those damn Blackfeet are on a warpath. They're killing white people. Mobilize the army. You got to get rid of those Indians because they're going to kill all the rest of us. And so all of the congressional people in the state called the army out of Fort Shaw. Colonel Baker was head of the unit there, 230 some soldiers, and they marched a few days after that occurrence happened, maybe a couple weeks. And they say it was 30 below weather. Heavy Runner was camped on what we call the BEAR River at that time. I call it Marias. And he had his papers, he had his medal showing that he was friendly, but he was in a smallpox camp. Well, Baker was given the instructions, you kill any Indians you find. There's a book called Hit 'em Hard. So he mounted 2 Gatling guns on top of the hills, and the camp was down here on the river. And he told his soldiers, go ahead and right at sunup, open up on your guns. Don't let anybody out of the camp. And then after the Gatlin's gun got down, the horse riders come down with their bayonets. Anybody that was alive, they'd shot him. One of the ranchers, he said there was skulls on a fence post of the Indians that were killed at that time because they didn't bury them. And the babies, they said they'd throw the babies up and cavalry would stick them with a knife. And you think of those types of things and you think, where was the value of all of that stuff? Where was the common sense of investigating why Malcolm Clark got killed in the first place? Would have eliminated all of that hassle. Those people would have come out of that smallpox camp probably alive. But the other problem that existed is the ladies that survived, they either made it back into Canada or they went to Fort Benton. And at Fort Benton, as those guys got off the boat, they'd say, yeah, there's an Indian woman, go marry her. Because at that time, they were starting to give land back to the Indians in terms of what they call allotment. And there's a whole other stories as to what happened there when those mixed marriages came about. Generosity, really a big value in Indian life. You know, when we got our pipe, I was telling Mrs., I wasn't working at the time, I was just doing part-time work. I said, how are we gonna feed 100 people, 200 people? The meat that you have to buy, all of the groceries that you have to buy. Of course, we pretty much had berries in place. And the old people said, don't worry about that. Because in your prayers, what will happen is the people that respect your ceremony will bring. And those things will come. And sure enough. So you get all of these things coming in, but you give everything back out. And the philosophy there is, if I give every one of you a gift from the things that I received, instead of receiving one gift, I receive all of your gifts at some time back. And so that value in its sense is very important, because generosity, again, going back to the I mentality, you have people that are stingy. And there are stories on how those stingy people came about. We got till 2:30, huh? You get me started, I'll go all night. And so when we look at the other things, I have a whole bunch of, we talk about conceitedness. I come home, I start teaching school, and some of my classmates, they said, Smokey, why are you trying to be like a white guy? Oh, what do you mean? I said, I was told to go get an education, and I got education, I'm teaching, and working on a master's and all this kind of stuff. What do you mean being a white guy? Well, geez, you come back home, you wear a nice shirt, you wear a suit, your shoes are always polished. What's wrong with that? Well, you're just trying to be like the white guy. And I said, well, no, I'm not. I said, but if I can set the example and change that cycle, maybe other people will follow. And so when I began teaching school, I began to look at the components of culture to be put into that. And I found that a lot of the kids really accepted that fact that now they could relate to something other than just going into a classroom and being part of that. And so the openness in terms of who you are, that humor, that generosity, that love, all of these different components of the English language begins to compile into what we used to have as traditional people. You know, we heard about George Heveron telling us about government. When they established that first council in 1992, there was no full-bloods elected. My grandfather was a full-blood. He sat on that council from 1912 to 1923. There were 4 full-bloods. There was 13 people that were identified to be part of that initial government. When the actual election came, the 13 people were all half-breeds because they could read English. They read the document. That document that they call a constitution, piece of junk. It's luckily that I have legal people in my family push it to them and say, give me the ideas. And so I can mix what we, in terms of, we used to be as stable people, are being fractionized by all these different English components. We talked about discipline. Discipline was one because when I talked about the kids knowing how to sit in ceremonies, how to sit in the classroom, how to sit in a gathering. My granddaughter's head of the Nipomokiks, the chickadees. She's been there since she was 7 years old. She was a leader. She transfers out this summer. But when we go to ceremony, and we're sitting there, we're sitting over here at the library, you know the first thing she does? Water, coffee. Well, we're going to eat. Food. Doesn't even hesitate because she knows that responsibility is there. And when we're done, cleans up and she sits. And other kids are sitting there. How come you're waiting on your grandfolks? Protocol. That's what's taught in terms of that discipline. We talk about trust, conservation. You know, that's one of the things that really melds us together as Indian people is that conservation. Because our association to the land is so close that if we lose it all, then land isn't important to us. We talk about land, we talk about water, we talk about fire, we talk about air. What's represented on our lodges? Those elements, the sky, the ground, the puffballs, the mushrooms, the design around it, the stars, even the poles, the pegs, the buttons, the paint itself, all represented because that's who we are. People say, gee, I want to get a lodge, but I don't want to get it painted. Well, do you know the protocol of a painted lodge? Men on one side, women on the other side, can't go around the circle, fire. Some lodges, you can't have raw meat in them. All these different particular protocols. Well, we didn't know that. We just want a lodge to make it look good. Well, if you're going to go the whole way. You know, I can transfer the design to you. And all it's going to cost you is maybe a little T-bone steak and some berry soup. Heck, I can do that on a weekend. I can even paint it and design it for you. But if you're going to have a lodge, do it right. And it's funny because the little lodge that Darnell has over there, we can tell by the design, the bottom, the top, the stars, the colors, as to who those people are, without even knowing who they are, because you know where they're located. And if you know where they're located, you know whether they're traditional or non-traditional, and you can pretty much guess who owns those. We talked about the Big Dipper. We talked about the lost children on the other flap, of how they were so abstinent about listening to direction, of pulling away from the rest of the families of no, I'm not going to work. I don't have to do that. You do it. It's not my job. Not my job description. And what happened? They end up perishing. And the other part of that is they wanted those red calf robes off the buffalo, where the other kids' family provided that. And so that whole story tells us that if you don't be a parent to your kids, something's going to go wrong. And for me, my son is a middle boy. He worked for the Washington Redskins for 7 years, maintained the stadium there. Last year he got inducted into the Montana Pro Hall of Fame. The only native to serve on that capacity at that level was Jim Thorpe, 1922. And so for me, it's very an honor to use him as a comparison, because at one time he was into his alcohol. He would never admit he was into any kind of drugs, and I've never, at the time he was growing up in high school, I never found any drugs but alcohol. And so I would just bother him about going to treatment. He went to treatment twice, and every time he went to treatment, he took over the entire treatment program because he knew how to manipulate. He knew how to use the terms. He was college educated, so he used that system to his advantage. But then when he got out of there, back to he liked Crown Royal whiskey straight. I don't know how you ever got that. I would never drink that stuff. And so the third time he went to treatment, I told him, I said, you either go or don't come to my house. I don't want you around. I don't want you showing the other grandkids that their uncle is a drunk. And he said, Dad, I really hate you. Oh, but knocked me over. Why do you hate me? He said, I want to do what I want to do, and you're trying to dictate to me, and I hate you for that. I said, well, Robert, go to treatment, and then when you come out, tell me what you've experienced. So while he was working for the Redskins, he went to treatment in Florida. And he come out of there and he said, Dad, guess what? I love you. He said, because you quit being a friend when you demanded that I stay away from your house. Because if you remained a parent, you would have put up with me. You would have been an enabler. And you would allow me to continue to drink, even though I would go out in the car and drink while I was at your house. But now, he said, I love you because I realize the value of what you were teaching through the native side of things. He works for Marathon Oil right now in Denver. Big 14th company in the Fortune 500. He's head of the native department there. Now he could have went to the NBA games. But he said, you know, Dad, he said, I'm kind of tired of that chaos. He had 5,000 employees while he was in D.C. Get there first thing in the morning, he'd be the last to leave at midnight. He said, I'm getting tired. I just want to get back to me, my family, culture, those types of things. We talked about life and death. You know, we had the option to live forever. That gal that threw the buffalo chip in the water when it floated, and the guy that threw the rock, they choose the rock versus the chip, so now we die. But what death has given us is that responsibility. And I say, we go from stories to memories. We talk about a person when they're alive as a story, but when they die, that's a memory that'll be with us forever. Death in contemporary world is overwhelming. We have families right now in the res that are split because of the I attitude of I should own that land, I should own that house, I should own my dad's car because when he died he gave it to me, but he never put it in writing. The simple things like that. We talk about Noppy when he beat up the bullberry bush, of that respect where he thought he knew everything. And he tried to dive into the water to get them berries. He almost drowned. And when he come up, he noticed that them berries were above him. So he got mad at the bullberry bush, and he took that stick and he's whacking that poor bush, and the berries were falling off. And so today, when my grandma, when she was alive, she'd say, Smokey, come out, we're going to go down. We're going to pick bullberries right after that first frost. She'd put her blanket or her tarp down there and she'd, now take that broom and just beat the heck out of that tree. And them berries would fall, and we would remind ourselves of that story of Noppy. And so when we look at that, and we talked about conceit, when Noppy was trying to eat them gophers, he told the bobcat to watch, and when them gophers would come out of the fire, he would jump in there and back and forth. And then he finally told him, he said, don't tell them gophers to come out because we're going to cook them for supper. And so the bobcat told him, he said, well, I'll race you to see who eats what. And Noppy said, I'm the fastest guy in the world and nobody can outrun me. But the bobcat knew that if he let Noppy run ahead of him, he could run back and eat as many gophers as he wanted. But see, Noppy had that conceited mind, I'm the fastest runner in the world. I can beat this guy. So he took off and he left him way behind. The bobcat went back and ate all the gophers. So even when you're talking about knowing and having that knowledge, don't get it to the level of being conceit, because then you go into that I attitude again. Stay in that neutral we attitude. I think we're probably about 30 seconds. There's a lot of other things, names, baby names, adult names, adolescent names, old people names, all descriptions in terms of who we are as people. The last thing I'd like to talk about is intertribal racism. We talk about that because that capitalistic attitude that we've been all bred into is part of that I attitude, where we're all jealous of each other. We can't seem to let people get ahead, but ask them how they got ahead so that I can get ahead with them. We have over 1,600 people on the waiting list for homes. We have over 500 kids in our school of 2,000 kids that identify themselves as homeless. But we're not doing anything about it. We're building arbors, we're building whatever. We're not building our own homes. We're not building the things necessary for our livelihood that we used to have. I didn't get into the warrior attitude in terms of how I, as a male, perceive the world in terms of how I would treat my family. You know, there's so many things and so many values that go along with our traditions. It's just impossible. I've been talking for an hour and a half, and I know a lot of you probably have comments or questions or whatever, but that's all part of it. You know, I always tell people, don't hesitate of asking a question, because I don't want you going home saying, I should ask Smokey that question. Or, I don't ask it, it's too stupid. There's no stupid questions. My wife always says, life never quits teaching and we never quit learning. But I just thank you. Is there any questions? Yes.
I don't have a question, but I have so I'm just finishing up my IMSW program with Gay Lucky here.
What does that stand for?
Indigenous Masters of Social Work.
Oh, okay.
And so we're doing a capstone. Capstone meaning kind of like highlights of our course the past year. And so I've been doing a lot of research on the staff within the Horn Society, because I was a member back in the 90s, and its relation to the lost children. And so part of my capstone is going to be reflective on that, because it's what the staff represents is the everlasting life. And so for me, a big part of our research throughout the year has been on child protection, because I'm a supervisor with child protection. So I've been trying to get out of that role because I don't want to be working in that area any longer. And hear these stories all relate, and all the values, they're all interconnected, and that interdependency on one another. And so I really appreciated hearing a lot of these, because in our studies they're called ontological responsibilities, and which is a lot of what you just finished bringing forth. So I was able to relate to a lot of that. Emphasizing on a lot of the stories, and the relationship to the animals has really been, I think it needs to be heard from the elementary level onward, because I totally agree with all of what you're saying.
Yep. You know, I think there's only the snake. It don't have anything other than the story. The tadpole, very important, but again, don't have an actual story, but it relates to the war deeds, you know, but it also refers to changing of life, just like we change life from children to adolescent to old, to adult to old. We also have that change, but we forgot how to do those changes, and we just go through from A to Z, and hope that we're successful at that. But we need to get back into teaching those stages.
What's a good book down here for the stories?
Gee, you know, my stories, I got about, dozens of books that I read, just so I get, I do a whole study on fort development. I do a whole study on education development. I do a whole study on values. I do the Genesis type things with the stars. And I don't really depend on one book.
Yeah.
It's kind of a combination, but I'm really particular on who the author is.
Yeah.
Because so many times you'll have an author that copies something else. Yeah. And just by an English word that shouldn't be there changes the whole meaning of what we would look at it in terms of our conception of what that might be. Darnell and I, we did the book People Before the Park, and it has a lot of traditional teachings in there in terms of nature. You know, she does a very, very thorough presentation on plants and herbs and medicines.
What's
And
it called?
People Before the Park. It's our relation before they established Glacier Park. Then they have a Kootenai side of it, which the Kootenays were on that side of the mountains.
Right.
In that relationship, you know. I always tell people it wasn't always, we didn't always battle everybody else. We always kind of considered what they were all about and shared what we had.
Yeah.
But it was those times when they abused and misused and overkilled and left it, then we had to kick them out of our territory. Thank you all. Have a good one.